Good afternoon, everyone. I seek the permission of the chair to adopt the protocol that has been established this afternoon. Kenrick W. Clifton was born in Sandy Point, St. Kitts, of Anguillian and Nevisian parentage. At an early age, he showed promise in both academics and athletics while a student at the Sandy Point High School. He still holds the Class II high jump record of 6 feet 2 inches, which was set in 1976. He moved to the United States, completed high school, and attended Boise State University in Idaho on an academic and athletic scholarship. In track, he set the Big Sky Conference 400-meter record and was named to the freshman All-American football team the same year as famed Miami Dolphins quarterback Dan Marino. Upon graduation from university, Councillor Clifton returned to his homeland, worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and was a member of the Independence Organizing Committee. He was very active in his community and represented Sandy Point in both football and cricket, and founded the Sandy Point Bees Etonics Athletic Club, which won the national championships. Clifton became a United Nations Fellow in 1984 and also represented St. Kitts and Nevis in New York. Later, at age 26, he became the youngest person to head a government corporation, and 4 years later was appointed permanent secretary in the Ministry of Tourism and Trade, where he played a pivotal role in spearheading the country's tourism development. He is extremely proud to have been part of a team that developed the Dr. Kennedy Simmons Highway and the Land Reclamation Project, now known as Port Zante, which provided access to land and untold development possibilities. He also takes pride in his role in helping to transform the tourism industry from 5 cruise ships per year to several hundreds per year, and from attracting about 12,000 stay-over tourists to hundreds of thousands of visitors. In 1995, Councillor Clifton's career in the government service came to an end, and he left the country. Clifton's professional background is matched by his academic accomplishments. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Boise State University, a master's degree in government and international relations from Queens College in New York, and graduated with a certificate in investment appraisal from Harvard University. He also graduated with first-class honors from Wolverhampton Law School in the United Kingdom and received his postgraduate legal education from the Inns of Court School of Law, Britain's premier legal institution. Clifton also received his legal education certificate from Norman Manley Law School in Jamaica and was admitted to practice law in England and Wales and the Eastern Caribbean. Clifton also received a stellar athletic career and helped to pave the way for modern-day icons such as Kim Collins. He's a former 400-meter national champion and the record holder until recently. He is the first national to represent the country in the World Athletic Championships, which were held in Helsinki, Finland in 1983. He was coached by the late Dr. Bertram Hudson Ross and Simo Davis, and competed at the Helsinki Games alongside Americans Carl Lewis and Florence Joyner Griffith. After Clifton's active athletic career, he was named national head coach and then served as president of the St. Kitts Amateur Athletic Association. Clifton is also a prolific writer on legal, educational, and political issues. He has published scholarly articles, including The Caribbean Court of Justice, How Participatory is Our Democracy, Electoral Reform, An Idea Whose Time Has Come, and The Independence of the Judiciary. Kenrick Clifton's accomplishments reached a crescendo when he was elected to the high office of Town Councilor in 2008 on the Randolph Town Council, the legislative body for the town of Randolph, a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts. In his first attempt for political office, he defeated well-established opponents, and in 2011 was returned to office unopposed. has also served on Governor Deval Patrick's task force for the implementation of President Obama's stimulus bill. The Honorable Kenrick W. Clifton holds the rare distinction of being the only known national of St. Kitts and Nevis to have been elected to the legislative branch of municipal government in the United States of America. Town Councillor Ken Clifton, as he is known to his constituents in Randolph, Massachusetts, also made history when his overwhelming victory at the polls made him the first person of color to accomplish such a feat in the town's 200-year history. And you know it is said that behind every good man is a better woman. So Town Councillor Kenrick Clifton is married to Karen Haynes Clifton from Bass Stay St. Kitts, and is the father of three, namely Tazula, Brandon, and Kyle. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome our featured speaker, fellow Sandy Pointer, and distinguished son of the soil, Town Councillor, the Honorable Kenrick Clifton.
Thank you, Laverne, thank you. I suspect that Laverne might have said those nice things about me because she happens to be my cousin. So. I've come to affirm my conviction and my belief in the notion so eloquently expressed by Dr. Martin Luther King that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That fateful day, the 16th of February, 2015, is a day that will forever be etched in your hearts, your souls, and your consciousness. It is a day when the fate of the country hung precipitously in the balance. It was a defining moment. We were at the crossroads. It was a day when you chose peace over discord, love over hate, and unity over division. It was a day when you made that sacred choice, a choice that reflected not your fears and consternation, but your dreams, your goals, and your aspirations. But let us not have any illusions. The odds were against you. State institutions were against you. The electoral apparatus was against you. The resources were against you. The system was against you. But as Romans tells us, if God is for us, who can be against us? So yes, there were many mountains to climb, and there were many valleys to navigate. But you were never daunted. You were never deterred, and you would not be denied. Instead, you stood tall as a beacon of hope, and in one loud, resounding voice, you said to the world, the will of the people will always prevail. And so on behalf of all peace-loving people around the world, and those committed to fundamental rights and justice, I extend heartfelt and most profound congratulations on your historic victory at the polls. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are graced by the presence of our distinguished Prime Minister, Dr. Timothy Harris. And from what I heard from a certain sheriff across the ocean, our Prime Minister is in the check-in lounge. And I also heard that a certain ex-prime minister is on the outside looking in. From what I understand from my friends throughout the Caribbean, and from what I have personally observed, Prime Minister Harris is quickly emerging as a respected and influential leader. And from all accounts, Dr. Harris's impact on the region has been both immediate and drastic. Let us all remember, ladies and gentlemen, as patriots, that Dr. Harris's success is our success. It's the country's success, and it's the region's success. So let us keep him in our thoughts and our prayers. I recognize the leader of the People's Action Movement, the Honorable Sean Richards. I don't know if many of you are aware, but Sean is like a little brother to me. And I'm telling you, I'm so proud of Sean, and I'm so proud of his accomplishments. In fact, it seems that it was only a few years ago that Sean used to ride his little bicycle from Crab Hill all the way to Cleverly Hill, handing out pamphlets. And now today, Sean, I look at you as the leader of the People's Action Movement and the Deputy Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis. I'm so proud of you. Let me also recognize another real and authentic leader, not someone who calls himself the boss and ruled by edicts and threats, but one who inspired, one who motivated, and one who served with grace, dignity, and distinction, the Right Honorable Sir Kennedy Alphonse Simmons. I acknowledge the presence of our Premier, the Honorable Van Samry. And let me tell you a little anecdote that is typical of the character of this gentleman. A few years ago, while Premier Amry was in opposition, without knowing whom I was, he helped my mom all the way from the airport in St. Kitts, checked through immigration and customs in the United States, and delivered my mom to my sister in New York. And Mr. Premier, my mom has asked me to remind you and to say thanks to you. And may I crave your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, and break a bit with protocol and also introduce someone who is extremely important to me. Important in terms of if she never existed, I would not be born. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce my 82-year-old mom right over here. Let me tell you something here. My first introduction to my mom's courage and determination was in 1967 when I was about 6 years old. The Army had come to search our little house in Cleverly Hill, Sandy Point. And I can recall my mom standing strong and standing tall. And as she stood, I hid behind her, peeking from behind her skirt, to see these men with these guns. Her only offense was that she was Anguillian and that she was an original member of the People's Action Movement. But I gotta be frank, my only thought during all of this was, gee, I wish I had all those toy guns for Christmas. Other elected officials, members of the diplomatic corps, members of the PAM executive, the clergy, and don't forget the clergy. The clergy was extremely instrumental in your recent victory. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. I bring you greetings from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the state that gave us the U.S. Constitution and the states where presidents are born. I rise before you honored, privileged, and proud, and I thank you for bestowing upon me this distinct honor to address you on this historic golden anniversary. Indeed, you had the pick of prime ministers and presidents, but instead, you have looked to one of your own. And let me be clear, your selection of me was less about me and more about you, your character, your vision, and your commitment to put people first and foremost. As an elected official in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I frequently have the privilege to address the public. But I gotta tell you that today is different. Today is special, it's personal, and I must admit, I'm somewhat overwhelmed with emotions and sentimental value. Though, brothers and sisters, though I've never really left you, at least not spiritually, there's a part of me that feels like a long-lost son, but a son, nonetheless, who has returned home after so many years and to the warm embrace of an extended family. I know I am being honored and recognized this afternoon, and I am forever grateful. But I also see this as a tribute to those who cared for me, those who inspired me, and those who supported me throughout my entire life. My family, my teachers, my friends, the clergy, the wise elders of Sandy Point, people who have had a profound impact on my life growing up in the small but proud town of Sandy Point. I must say, a town protected and sheltered by the shadows of the magic and majesty of Brimstone Hill, a community that raised its children to be proud and to have hope, faith, confidence, and the audacious will to succeed. And so, let me assure you this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, this is not an academic lecture. I am not here to teach you. In fact, I would be presumptuous if that was my intention. And how can I, when you are the ones who have taught me everything that I know? I want to thank the literally hundreds of people who stopped by my family's home in Cleverly Hills, Sandy Point, and welcomed me and gave me suggestions and ideas of what I should say and what I should not say, and so on. But I remember one elderly lady, and she said to me, "Mr. Clifton, those were 20 long years. Please, please, please tell them, do not forget us." And the message seemed simple, but it was a very profound message that that lady was sending. And so this afternoon, I want to have a discourse. I want to have a conversation, sort of a family conversation, a family discussion, if you will. Now, nostalgia has its place, so I want to reflect a bit on the impact that the public service had on my life and also on the success of the Dr. Kennedy Simmons' administration. I will not dwell too much on the history of the party because that has been well documented. But I do want to discuss a myth that has surrounded the People's Action Movement. I don't want to spend a lot of time looking back, but I want to take a glimpse at the role of misrule in developing states. Then we can look at the elections and the Privy Council's landmark ruling in the boundary case. I want to look at the future and have a conversation in terms of where do we go from here. The public service. It's obvious that the public service played a critical role in the success of the Simmons administration. As Laverne so politely pointed out, I had the privilege of attending various schools on several continents. But the truth is, I learned more from the public service here than I learned from all the universities throughout the various continents. Now, nostalgia does have its place. And for me, as a youngster, armed with a degree in international relations, I joined the public service at age 21. And I joined as what was called an administrative cadet. And I spent the next 14 years or so in the service of my country, the land that I love. Now, 30 years later, I'm still not sure what the duties of an administrative cadet were. All I know is that I had to run messages for senior civil servants. I used to carry their files, and I used to have to buy their lunches. But as a youngster, I feverishly took notes at meetings, but I was also taking mental notes. I was preparing myself for the future. Now, how could I, as a youngster, not learn from the likes of a Michael Powell's of the world, the Richard Keyneses, the Concy Mitchums, the Simeon Daniels, the Hugh Heiligers, the Sidney Morrises, the Tapley Seatons, His Excellency Kennedy Simmons, His Excellency Billy Herbert. Imagine me, a 21, 22-year-old, in a physical environment with these brilliant men. Men, you could disagree with their politics, but men who were masters at their craft. Now, these leaders were complemented by the giants of the private sector. The late Will Kelsick, the late Neil Rogers, Charles Brisbane, the late Romick Phipps, the late Frank Gordon, the late Calvin Wilkin, and on and on. I've observed personally some very tough, sometimes contentious discussions and debates, but they were always respectful. The public service was a professional organization that contributed greatly to the success of the PAM administration. The public service was a bastion of competence, efficiency, and intellect. There were no texting and emailing. Memos and notes were largely handwritten, and your English had to be impeccable, sentences properly constructed, and verbs correctly conjugated. I've learned so much in the public service, so much from the Sir Hugh Rollins, the late Suswin Mills, the late Alfonso Lewis, His Excellency Terence Byron, Aubrey Hart, Calvin Ferrier, the late Bertram Haynes, Sylvine Henry, Wycliffe Morton, the late Hugh Ray, and it goes on and on. These were brilliant professionals. So working around these giants of the public service made you a better professional and a better person. There was courtesy, there was respect, and there was a culture of high expectations. It is often said in sports that a team essentially takes on the personality of its captain. And this is also true in the public service. And it certainly was the case with Dr. Simmons. And I have to say this about Dr. Simmons. One of the things that I learned traveling around with Dr. Simmons was the way he treated not his fellow prime ministers and dignitaries, but the way he related to the maids and the hotel workers and those who were often invisible. It is a quality that I have carried with me throughout my professional life. And again, I want to thank him for that. Now, we talked about the performance of the People's Action Movement. So what of PAM's performance in government? Any objective analysis will conclude that PAM's performance in government was nothing short of spectacular. Yet, over the past 20 years, we have been hearing that the People's Action Movement did nothing during its 15 years of service. Now, this is important. It is important for the record, and it is important for posterity. And the truth must be told. And so I said to you, you are now part of a government, and you have a moral obligation to ensure that the record is corrected, and again, the truth must be told. In the first place, during Pam's tenure, St. Kitts and Nevis consistently boasted the highest growth rate throughout the Caribbean and Latin America. As permanent secretary and as director of tourism, I should know how the tourism industry was dramatically transformed. You heard Laverne spoke about from 4 or 5 cruise ships annually to over 100 cruise ships, from 12,000 visitors to over 100,000 visitors. Tourism expenditures climbed into the millions. Dramatic transformation of the tourism industry led ably by Mr. Michael Powell. Now, who transformed the monoculture-based economy to a tourism and service-based economy? What of the strides made of education? And in terms of security, what did we have? 1 or 2 murders a year? Now, when the Southeast Peninsula Road was being constructed, it was supposed to be a highway to nowhere. Port Zante was characterized as a pipe dream. I think they better call it Port Simmons. What do you say? The establishment of missions and embassies around the world was just Dr. Simmons playing Christopher Columbus. You folks remember that? Yeah. Now, even the visionary establishment of diplomatic relations with Taiwan was made fun of. And in a strange twist of fate, it was the same Taiwan that was literally breathing life into the economy over the past 20 years. And I must say that we are forever grateful to our Taiwanese friends. Don't let them fool you. The computerization of the public service was initiated under the Kennedy Simmons administration. In fact, the computerization of the public service was supposed to be just a gimmick and a way for Richard Keynes to sell computers. Have you ever sold computers? And who recognized the value of the youth by reducing the voting age? And this one is a little personal to me. You guys remember the expression sports and sporting facilities can't eat? Okay. Well, like many young athletes, I took this comment personal, and had these initiatives not been implemented, clearly there would not be a Kim Collins. Okay? So. Now, I'm getting to a very interesting piece of my presentation, so I want you to put on your seatbelts. Okay. First of all, I want to extend commendations to the former Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Dr. Denzel Douglas, for his contribution and for his service to the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Commendations, however, do not inoculate the former Prime Minister and his administration from responsibility and accountability. It is now well documented that over the past few years, that our country has been through a lot of problems, a lot of challenges, a lot of difficulties. Some would say there were trials and tribulations. Others would say there was chaos and confusion. Still others would say there was murder and mayhem. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, over the past few years, our people and our country have been traumatized. traumatized. Some of us overseas sat in horror as our country, our beloved federation, appeared to be imploding. Our people at home must be praised for their maturity and for their poise. People with less resilience and less fortitude and less commitment to freedom and democracy, frankly, would have succumbed to these problems. But our people demonstrated patience, maturity, and an abiding faith in God the Almighty. Our people looked to regional institutions, but to no avail. We looked to the private sector and civil society, but with little or no success. Defenders and apologists argued that there was no murder and mayhem as a result of the Douglas administration's violations. There was no rioting, there was no burning, there was no looting, they contend. Now, with the Four Seasons Accords as a historical precedent, which essentially required the Simmons administration to hold early elections, I would have liked to have seen the private sector play a more active role in mediating the crisis. I have great confidence in our private sector, and I believe there could have been a constructive force for peace and for justice. Except for the occasional nice words and the hyperbole and the commentaries, the private sector and much of civil society appeared to have found it very difficult to do the right thing when the wrong thing seemed much easier. It was claimed that international investors were coming and they were bearing gifts, so why worry? So by their logic, the timing of justice was inconvenient. But the appeasers must understand it is never inconvenient for justice. And in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, the time is always right to do the right thing. And so while much of civil society and regional institutions were fearful or were motivated by opportunism, the struggle for justice was left to the ordinary man and woman in this country. I must mention the likes of Mr. Politics, Culture, Nurse Garnett, Terry, and many others. These folks have become household names not only in the Federation, but in New York, Boston, and further afield. Now, there are those who say I should remain silent and be indifferent. And I thank them for their concern. But for me, my actions are dictated by my principles, my convictions, and my conscience. And to them I say indifference always helps the oppressor, never the victim. And silence encourages the tormentors, never the tormented. I am here not to tear down, but to build up. But we have got to admit that the conduct of the affairs of our country has been both hideous and revolting. And to pretend otherwise would be disingenuous and counterproductive. I could not, brothers and sisters, I could not, in good conscience, remain silent in the face of an emerging dictatorship. Some say, why bring up the past? And I remind them of the wisdom of our African ancestors, that yes, life must be understood in the present, but can only be really achieved in an effective manner looking backwards. We should discuss these issues, and we should do so with the objective that never again should our country experience such trauma. Now, there's so many issues that I would like to touch on. Unfortunately, we don't have all the time. But many of us We've all shed our collective tears as our country sat poised on the verge of collapsing. The violation and disrespect of the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land. The dubious distinction of becoming one of the most murderous countries per capita. The arbitrary and sometimes indiscriminate selling of our passports and patrimony, sometimes to questionable and nefarious characters, brought shame and disgrace to our country as we were rebuked by Canada and the United States of America. The nepotism, the cronyism, rising to unprecedented levels and have been much talked about. The abuse, and I know this personally, the abuse and misuse of the overseas embassies and missions for partisan political purposes in violation of the Geneva Convention. The apparent collusion in Parliament and the refusal to table the motion of no confidence as required by the Constitution and in adherence to centuries of parliamentary practice and procedure. The abuse of state radio and television and the misuse of state assets. The scathing attack on the judiciary in an attempt to undermine the legitimacy and the authority of the courts. The decimation of the electoral process. The famous, or should I say infamous, purported proclamation. And of course, the horrendous election night and the aftermath, which brought shame and disgrace to our country. Now, let me just take a couple seconds and say a few words about the monk, and not Lord Cutts' version, I might add, but the motion of no confidence. It was a watershed moment for our country and for our people. It was a turning point for many of our people. Many moderate Labour supporters, in good conscience, could not support a brazen violation of the Constitution and the gamesmanship within Parliament. Besides, everyone understood the very simple proposition that 6 was obviously more than 5. I myself, as a student of law and jurisprudence, and more importantly, as a citizen, I could not accept that very dangerous trend. And so in July 2013, I published a commentary entitled A Statement on the Constitutional Crisis in St. Kitts and Nevis, a Plea for Peace and Justice. I stated, and I quote, occasionally in life, there comes a moment in time when remaining silent in the face of an impending travesty is a betrayal of peace and justice. I continued, but my appeal is not about partisan, nor is it even about politics. It's really about a simple virtue called justice. Unfortunately, our country is in an impasse. For well over 7 months, an unprecedented length of time, a motion of no confidence in the government of our Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Dr. Denzel Douglas, has been filed. Now, that was 7 months, and we know 18 months after, there was still the failure to table the motion. I concluded by appealing to the conscience of the Prime Minister, and I said in my commentary, I therefore make an unequivocal and direct appeal to the Prime Minister and Speaker to put country first and adhere to the democratic norms and ideals. In the interest of peace and justice, I appeal to the better judgment of the Prime Minister, and I beseech the government to hear the motion. To do otherwise would be irresponsible at best and illegitimate at worst. It would be contrary to their oath, and more importantly, a violation of the sacred rights of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. As I said, this statement was made 7 months after the motion was initially filed. And who could have really imagined, think about it, who could have imagined that a motion of no confidence would remain for practically 2 years. Interestingly enough, if not ironic, that if the Prime Minister at the time had taken the advice of many people, perhaps he would have had a better chance of winning the elections. Yeah? But they say hindsight is what, 20/20? All right. Now, our own King Arrow, in his timely and timeless classic, Arise, has engraved in our consciousness and in our minds questions that all of us have pondered one time or another. King Arrow asked, would you stand up and see your country dying and never lend a helping hand? Would you see your children's future dwindling, creating much disillusion? And how could we watch on idly, disregarding our self-sufficiency? After the near decimation of our country, after the division and the emasculation of our people, after the violation of our Constitution, after the shame and disgrace brought upon our country, how could we, in good conscience, remain silent? The truth is, it was King Arrow's classic that inspired me to formally publish an endorsement of the unity concept during the last election. King Arrow reminded me, how could my conscience be clear, indulging corruption or misusing public office? My endorsement was published on the 9th of February. Now, remember the date, the 9th of February. And that date is important because it was right after the Court of Appeal had upheld the High Court's decision to discharge the injunction. This meant that new boundaries would come into effect. But I know my people, and I knew they would be down, if not despondent. And so I wondered what I could do to help, even if it was to give one person some little hope. And so I penned my endorsement and I titled it, Choices, a Message to the People of St. Kitts and Nevis. I stated, and I quote, on February 16, 2015, our citizens will be in a very real way making the most important choice they will ever make regarding our nation's future. I continued, the people of St. Kitts and Nevis must choose between looking to the past and accepting the same old politics of pain and division on one hand, and that of reaching for the future where citizens are united and better together. And in keeping with the theme of King Arrow, I concluded, I urge you, my fellow nationals, to choose a team that will be relentless and tireless in uniting our country and bringing prosperity to all our people. As fate would have it, on February 16, 2015, justice was served. Now, during the Privy Council oral hearing of the boundary case, you would have heard, I think it was Lord Mance, who continued to emphasize the word purported proclamation. This is, of course, English niceties for saying that the proclamation was phony and a fraud, right? Now, Fighting Hunks of Connery, I'm sure you all know Fighting Hunks? Yeah. Fighting Hunks of Connery is known for saying that our Constitution did not see a Denzel Douglas coming. Okay? Now, this may seem simple, but it is a most profound observation. And Hunks is right, because our Constitution, in fact, any Constitution, expects a certain degree of decorum and compliance. So yes, Hunks was right. The Constitution did not see Douglas coming. But you know who did? The Privy Council saw him coming and stopped him dead in his tracks. That's right. Now, some 200 years before Fighting Hunks made his observation. A French philosopher by the name of Montesquieu, he came up with the concept of separation of powers, which essentially divided the powers into the executive branch, the legislative branch, which is our parliament, and the judiciary, which is our courts. Montesquieu, like Hunks, was concerned that the accumulation of power of the three branches of government into the hands of the same person would amount to tyranny and a full-blown dictator. Now listen up carefully now. When you have lost three of your most senior ministers, and as I understand it, a fourth got cold feet and changed his mind, do you know what that means? And when you've manipulated and you've corrupted parliament, what does that say? It's two branches. And when you've sought to undermine and publicly castigate the third branch, the courts, because it did not rule in your favor, what does that make you? I think Montesquieu answered that question. Because according to Montesquieu, that makes you a full-blown dictator. So folks, we were very lucky on February the 16th, because the third branch was inches away. So again, I want to really commend you folks for standing up and for being counted. Now, I could not close my presentation without saying a few words about victimization. I mean, you've been hearing bandied around all the time, haven't you? Victimization? Yeah. I raised this issue primarily because I was on the commuter rail, the train, and I heard the ex-prime minister on radio claiming that the governor general and a permanent secretary were being victimized. And, you know, my opposition to victimization is very clear, and it has been made public. Unfortunately, however, it appears that allegation of victimization around the region is now being used as a political strategy. So you got to be careful. Okay. But let me state here, and let me state categorically clear, the ex-prime minister has absolutely no authority to lecture anyone on victimization. Okay. Okay. And I make this statement not based on hearsay, not based on social media, not based on what I heard, not based on what I read. I make this statement based on life experience. Okay? As you heard, when the government changed in 1995, I was permanent secretary. And the political operative that was placed in my department literally terrorized my staff. Okay. Terrorized my staff. This particular political operative now fancies himself as a radio personality, but will remain nameless for now. Let me tell you this. In fact, on one occasion, I was having a staff meeting, and as a permanent secretary, I was to sit at the head of the table. Standard procedure. In an attempt to embarrass and to humiliate me, another political operative removed the chair from where I was to sit and started giggling. Don't tell me about victimization. Okay? Fortunately, one of my staff quickly scampered around to find a chair for me to be seated so that I would not be further embarrassed. I could call that person's name, but I would keep it confidential for now. Yeah. Furthermore, brothers and sisters, I was summarily removed from my job without just cause. From reliable sources, and I want you to listen carefully, from reliable sources, I heard that when I was being removed, a certain gentleman stood up and essentially said, Clifton is highly qualified, and he has a lot to contribute to this country. Leave the man alone or send him to my ministry. That gentleman of whom I spoke is none other than the Honorable Sam Condor. And you know what? For some 20 years, 2 children since, 1 18, 20 years, I've always wanted to say thanks to Mr. Condor. And this is kind of emotional to me because I never really got the chance to. And so I know Sam has left, but I want to say in his absence, thanks, and I love you too. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I close where I began. We've come full circle. Now I ask, what does the future hold? And where do we go from here? On February the 16th, you are at a crossroad. Today, you're once again at another crossroad. The past may dictate who we were, but the future determines who we become. We stand today on the edge of a new era. There are threats, but yes, there are obstacles. However, there are unfulfilled hopes, and there's the promise of a brighter tomorrow. We must decide what kind of nation we are, and in what direction do we want to move. How do we respond to the challenges of the future? Do we react with bitterness, or do we transform the perceived injustices into a creative force? We are too small a nation, brothers and sisters. We are too small a nation to devour our own. For too long, over successive decades, there has been too much pain and too much suffering. We have seen families torn apart, friends divided. We have seen forced migration, all for political partisanship. We can't have a society where half of the country is contributing to the national good, while the other half becomes a destructive force. We must pull together as one. In my district in Massachusetts, Chinese and Hispanics live together. East Europeans and Africans live together. Blacks and whites live together. They can all coexist, and they can all get along. So why can't we Kittians and Kittitians live together because some support PAM and some support Labor? Or why can't Nivisions live together because some Nivisions support NRP and some support CCM? This is simple. This is simply not sustainable. It is time to heal the wounds. It is time for reflection, and it is time for contrition. We must face the future as one. The stakes are too high, and failure is not an option. We must create educational opportunities for our citizens at the very highest levels. It was Malcolm X who once said, "Education is our passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to the people who prepare for it today." We must deal with this mindless menace of violence that is staining our land. The victims of the violence are human beings whom other human beings love and needed. We must bring economic development and opportunity that empower our people and our people first. We must practice bottom-up approach to governance, whereby the voices of all the people are heard and the ideas of the ordinary man and woman is given the same value. Our own Dr. Bishara Siheli has blogged extensively on this subject matter, and from which we can all learn. As a society, we must be more open and we must be more transparent, as transparency engenders truth, trust, and reconciliation. As a people, we must be united. Abraham Lincoln told us, a house divided against itself cannot stand. We cannot be sustained permanently, one quarter PAM, one quarter labor, one quarter NRP, one quarter CCM. We must come together as a whole. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as I close, the moment of truth is yet again upon us as we approach this new crossroad. And I now leave you with this thought. Yesterday is now history. Tomorrow is the future. Today is all we have. We have a nation to build. Let us begin. Thank you. God bless you.
Honorable? Yes. Honorable Kenrick Clifton, on behalf of my political leader, the Honorable Sean Richards, and the executive of the People's Action Movement, I thank you for agreeing to be our featured speaker at this, our 50th annual convention. I am certain that all present appreciate your words shared with us this afternoon on the public service, our past struggles, and the way forward. We truly have been blessed. Thank you once again.